Hey, United Truth Hunters. It is Hungry for Truth with Drea James, your host. And today we have a special video. We have Derek Sloan, one of four candidates running for the leadership of the Conservative Party, which means if you are concerned with the way Canada is going, you're going to want to watch this video in full to see if you think that Derek is the man for the plan to help get Canada back on track and to go up against Trudeau in the next election. If you are new to this channel, go ahead and hit subscribe right now, and then you can select all to be updated on all of my posts. And if you like what Derek Sloan has to say, watch this video in full and then check out the link in the description below, because in that link, it gives you more information about Derek and how you can actually help out his plan so he can get more people knowing who he is. So I'll remind you to do that at the end of this video as well. Let's get to it. Hi, hey everybody. Welcome to Hungry for Truth with Drea James. Today we have a very special guest. Derek Sloan, unapologetically conservative, is up in the house. Thank you, Derek, for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So that slogan, how'd you come up with that?
Well, I wanted it to reflect the ideas that I had coming into this race. And I felt that, the only way for the Conservatives to win are to truly stand up for what they believe in and, not water it down. And, there's kind of two ways to do politics. One way is kind of like to just do whatever, the average person wants. So that's what I believe the Liberals do. They don't do anything unless they think that, public opinion's on their side and that it will help them win. But leadership isn't about just catering to whichever direction the wind is blowing. It means having a vision based on principles and values that you stick to. And then you convince people through integrity and through leadership that is the best vision for the country. And so I believe that that's the way that we need to go. And the Liberals can change their mind every 2 weeks based on public opinion polls. But I believe Conservatives need to have, a thoughtful, compassionate view that, sure, we can discuss and we can change when principle dictates that we need to change. But I don't believe in bending whichever way the wind blows. And I think that hopefully my slogan reflects those ideas.
I think it does, and I think it reflects you. I mean, you did not disappoint. It's nice and bold. I like that. This is Hungry for Truth, so I feel like you're a straight shooter with that kind of stuff. And I think that any kind of person who's looking at 2020 as the year to step up to the plate, I think deserves a round of applause for that alone, because 2020 is one of the most bizarre years. So thank you for doing that. So let's start off with what I think a lot is happening in the news and stuff. Let's just go right in. We know what happened with George Floyd and how it's kind of spread across the globe, especially in Canada. So I guess the first question I wanted to ask, is it right that your wife was born somewhere else? Is that right?
So my wife was born in Canada, but she is, depending on the terminology you like to use, a visible minority or a racialized person or a woman of color. Mm-hmm. And so my children are mixed. Now, again, because if you take an Anthropology 101 course, they will tell you that race as such doesn't exist. There is no specific group of criteria that you can use to demarcate, one group from another. And they'll give you examples of people who are considered different races depending on where they're from. So there'll be, baseball players from Dominican Republic that are considered, Latino in the United States, but they're considered, or they'll be considered Black in the United States, but they'll be considered Latino somewhere else. And we know that, in the Bible, God says we all come from one blood, right? So I believe in the human race. I believe that we're all in this together and that type of thing. But, this idea that there's some strict, categorization and you're either in or you're out. And if you're in, you get it. If you're not in, you don't get it. I mean, I understand the frustration. I understand all that. And we've seen that type of language in years past used for other reasons. Say, well, I'm this and not that. And I mean, we're all in this together. And I think that I hope a little bit more of that type of thinking will prevail during this time.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I don't see how we're going to get closer with so much emphasis on being divided. And I think it's good that some stuff is coming to the table. I know, like myself, I'm in an interracial marriage, and I do know that, like, when we travel to the States, that's where it does kind of seem very blatant as far as maybe racism goes. And it's on both sides. I mean, it's the Black people saying comments to us about us being together, just like it is the white people. So I do think that it's good to have awareness, but we have to be one race in order to get somewhere. So I like that you pointed that out. I do want to touch a little bit just on some of the differences we see in the judicial system, like in particular with our Indigenous people. I think it's around 30% are the prisoners, and they're only about 5% of the overall population. So if you were leader, what would you do to look into that to see if things are just or not?
Yeah, I mean, it's an issue that doesn't begin and end in the courtroom. It's an issue that begins, at birth, basically, right? So we need to make sure that the conditions on reserves are such that give Indigenous people opportunities. And there's no easy answer to that. I mean, I can tell you. One way to help improve that is to make sure that Indigenous people have access to good jobs. And there's no easy answer for that, but I mean, I can tell you one thing we should not do. I'll take the Coastal GasLink in British Columbia as an example. The elected band councils along the path of Coastal GasLink there approved of that project. They knew that it was going to bring in high-paying jobs to their communities. And, a smaller group of protesters and, attached sort of environmental groups were able to shut that down. So, anytime we can get a project that Indigenous people in the majority approve of, it'd be nice that we can actually get that project done. So that's not a full answer, but at least that's, a partial answer for some areas. And, providing economic opportunities is a good place to start.
It's not an easy answer. And that's another issue I'm seeing. We're looking, defund the police, like it's just one small aspect of something instead of looking at the whole deeper rooted issue. So let's move on over to some of the concerns that maybe people like myself, I literally just got involved in really caring about politics just because I didn't like what I was seeing happening with Canada. So that's a more recent thing. So there's probably a lot of people out there like myself. And I did ask in my Facebook group, which is United Truth Hunters on Facebook, I did ask if they had any questions for you. And so one of the things that came up was, what advice do you have to say to people who have a distrust in politicians, to the point that they don't even think there's a point of voting, even though they desperately want change in Canada? What advice do you have to say for them, in particular about you and yourself?
So yeah, the best way actually to deal with that is to get involved in politics. And what I always tell people is the opportunities for young people, and I'm not sure what the age range is that view your show, but for anybody, there's lots of opportunities to get involved at the local level. And, for me, and I'll try and break this down for your listeners. So by the time somebody's name is on a sign during an election, it's almost too late. And there's a process that happens before that where the person is chosen by local party members. So, as a young person, you could put your name forward to be the person that gets chosen to be put on the sign, which is what I did. You can be a party member that gets to decide, should it be Derek or someone else whose name is on the sign? Your choices are so much more broad when you're getting involved at the party level. And the great thing is you can literally, if you're in your own riding and there's a nomination race, which is what they call these selections for a person, you can talk to them all. You can look them in the eye. You can ask them whatever questions you want. When we're disconnected from politics, I understand the frustration, but you can literally, you can go to, the Conservatives have a convention, for example, every 2 years where they decide what their policy would be. And, roughly 1,100, 1,200 people from across the country come to this, and you can vote. You can be one of 1,200 instead of one of like 25 million voters or whatever the number of voters in Canada is, in deciding what the policy will be of the party that very well could form the next government. Wow. And so I was in Halifax in 2018, and I voted on things that were very important to me, and passed some things, were very close in others. But I would just encourage, whoever's watching your show to do your research on what parties accord with your values and get involved at the local level. And you can be on your board of directors of your local, party group there. You can be involved in conventions. You can promote or help a candidate who's running for a nomination. You can run yourself. There's so many things you can do. And at that level, it's pretty easy to smell the fake from the real. And it's a great way to make a difference.
I didn't know any of that, so thank you. And I love that you said I'm young, so that's good. So let's talk about parents right now. Over the last, I have a teenager and I have a toddler, so I'm seeing quite a difference in the school system or even the preschool system than when she was in school. So what are your opinions on some of the strong left ideologies that are in the school system right now, both in university? I remember when I was in university, I imagine it's even stronger now. So yeah, what's your opinions on that?
So I had a similar experience where I went to undergrad in the years 2004 to 2007. And then I was in the workforce, I either working for people, and I started my own business, and I was out of school for about 7 years. And then I went back to law school, 2014. And I noticed a big change myself. And there was a move towards sort of this cancel culture, this not respecting differences of opinions. If someone disagrees with you, it's not because they legitimately have a different opinion. It's because they're an evil, racist or homophobe or it doesn't really matter what the issue is. It was because that person was evil and needed to be ostracized and punished. That's not really a Canadian value. It's not a Western value. It's not a Christian value. I found it very troubling. And in fact, my experience in law school is what led me into politics, as I saw sort of the closing of the Canadian mind. And there's a book written years ago, The Closing of the American Mind, which is actually a great book. And, it's just showing how we're kind of going down sort of a very narrow left-leaning path. And if you, disagree on any point in that, you deserve to be punished. You're not, you're not with it. You're racist, or you're out of touch, or you're whatever. So that's a problem. And what we're seeing, I believe, in schools and so on, is we're seeing a lot of this ideology of, whether it's sort of the new, gender ideology or sexual ideologies. And again, it's a free country, and people can have these ideas, but when, it's getting taught to our kids as dogma that gender doesn't exist, or that there's 72 genders or whatever. I mean, this is having, and not every teacher is teaching this, but the educational program is given latitude to be teaching these things. And we're seeing, there's a great article that was written a little while ago in the National Post on a poor girl that was getting confused in an Ottawa public school system. If you just look up Barbara Kay on the internet there, you can see, and I met the mother of this girl actually at a rally or a campaign event prior to COVID. And, this mother was basically like a soft liberal prior to this. And her daughter came home her otherwise happy 6-year-old came home being like, my teacher's telling me boys and girls don't exist. I don't know what to do. And, the parents are like, well, no, daddy's a boy. He exists. Mommy's a girl. She exists. And this girl just got into this kind of depression. She just couldn't wrap her head around these concepts. And they went to the school and they're like, hey, could you guys just knock it off with this? And the teacher refused. The principal refused. The school board trustee or whatever refused. And so they actually have a case before a human rights tribunal in Ontario in regards to this matter. And we'll see what happens. But, we have to make sure that we're not indoctrinating our kids. And we have to make sure that, we're focusing on the basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic. And, it's a free country. And if people want to have, different ideas, that's great. But a lot of, what's billed as education, it has a indoctrinational element to it. And it can be a soft element or a hard element. I mean, in law school, I felt that we were being trained to be legal activists as a first and foremost, as opposed to lawyers, and meaning lawyers who use the charter and other instruments to actively challenge and promote a particular legal agenda. And I didn't like that. I found that problematic, and that's one of the main reasons why I got into this.
Wow, yeah. There's definitely a strong influence with school, like you're mentioning, and it reminds me of just a recent story with my daughter with vaccinations, actually. So we got this package, this really glorified package. I think they had 14 different languages sent home, and there was only 3 side effects that were super minor for her last round of vaccines that they wanted her to have done. And I simply just said to my daughter, I need some time to look through these to see what they're about and which ones you should have. And she was fine with that. And that's how I've done it. I just want to know what's getting injected into my daughter's arm, right? So she went to school and she said, my mom, wants to look it over. And they just said, well, you don't need your mom. You don't need your mom. You can go get your vaccines. And I thought, well, when did this shift happen? For health-wise, or even just, like you said, with doctrination. I think that parents know their children the best. We know what makes them tick, what makes them happy, and things like that. So we're able to gauge that far better than the education system. So I was quite taken aback by that. And I think that is a good segue into my next question, which was very popular in the group. Now, Derek, you've been very bold about saying no to mandated vaccines. You believe in choice. So that's really cool. One of the questions that was very popular was, what are your feelings about not necessarily the mandated vaccines coming from the government, but we're seeing things like with mass businesses mandating things to their employees and mandating things for entry into their stores. So we're also seeing some changes in Canada about our access to our medical information. So some of the concerns people are having that it's possibly, going to be a limit of what you can buy and sell and where you can work based on your decision of whether or not to have maybe the COVID-19 vaccination.
Yeah, so I think it's troubling, and we have to remember, and this was another thing that I brought up with the particular vaccine development that Canada is investing in funding. They're doing they're working with a company in China, CanSino Biologics, which has ties to the Chinese military. So, I mean, there's going to be people who maybe in general are in favor of vaccines and things like that, but they just maybe don't trust the information that's coming out from this particular vaccine. So I just think it's very dangerous when, public health advice is great. And, it may largely be spot on, but things like, advising wearing masks and all this, these things are wise in totality, but whether or not a given person wears a mask on a given day is not. These things were make the overall statistical likelihood of getting the disease less. But, they're not a make or break thing, particular, like taking masks for an example. And, I've had constituents that there was a constituent that desperately needed to have her eyes checked. And she had an issue with post-traumatic stress disorder from an incident that had occurred earlier in her life, that anything around her mouth just causes her to have a panic attack. And so there's people out there that for different reasons are unable to, for example, wear masks. And she could not get an appointment at the local, eye doctors or the place where they check your eyes. And, she lives out in the country. There's not a lot of different places to go. And she was, having a real issue with that. So, yeah, I think that anytime that we, anytime that we say everyone always in every circumstance must do this on pain of, this or that consequence is potentially dangerous. And I think that, the public health advice we're receiving now, it makes a little bit more sense. I mean, before they were saying don't wear masks, right? And now they're saying wear masks. So, I mean, public health advice is as fallible as any other device. It changes, on the week to month basis. So, I appreciate that, I'm sure they're doing it with the best of intentions, but we have to be careful about our civil liberties as well.
And some more of our civil liberties, I can't speak sometimes, it's just the way it is, are things like freedom of speech, freedom of media, freedom from press, all of those things. Myself in particular, I have been getting censored quite a bit on Facebook. I had my page taken down, and I take a lot of time. I make sure I post something, I'll read 4 sources before I post it, and I think one of my warnings was a meme, and memes are never supposed to be taken literally. It's just a joke, right? So I had my whole page removed. And then on my personal account, Facebook actually removed just 2 days ago the photos I had of white officers doing good things in Black American communities. So what is going on with, we saw Trump made some changes to the law affecting social media. Like, what's your take on what's happening with social media? It's not just me, it's tons of people, even doctors and scientists are saying the same thing. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's funny because we have 1,000 anecdotal stories like yours, which leads me to believe that there is systemic and systematic repression of information on these social media platforms. And, they get away with, they have basically limited liability or pretty much zero liability because they've argued that they're a platform and that they're therefore not responsible for the information that's on there. And yet they selectively, as Trump's, well, as he said, and as his campaign manager reiterated, they selectively, editorialize or change or remove. I mean, do I believe, for example, that, Mark Zuckerberg is staying up at night, cackling evilly to himself? Probably not. But the fact is that, the rules, apparently, whatever they have in place, are being selectively, monitored by whoever. And it always seems to, I mean, maybe someone else can show me some other examples, but it more often than not seems to impact people who are conservative or who have traditional values. And, it's a shame to think that a political agenda is being, actively promoted on these broad sharing platforms. Mm-hmm. And if you want me to go on, I'll say, yes, I'm going to do something about it as leader of the party.
Yes, that's awesome.
So banning and shadow banning, is another thing where it's harder to find out, but your stuff will still be on your page, but apparently it's harder for other people to see it. Mm-hmm. So, the banning, the shadow banning, all this stuff is a major problem. And I would make a law that if a company wants to do business in Canada, which I'm sure they do, why wouldn't they? Plenty of ad revenue. For a broad-based platform. Now, if you make your own Andrea book where you only want to invite, your 3 friends, then you can have, your own rules. But on a broad-based platform that's open to the public at large, the only way that someone will be banned is if they break an existing Canadian law. So if you're promoting terrorism, if you're intimidating, if you're threatening, if you're publishing, if you have access to someone else's photos that aren't yours and you're publishing them, I mean, that's, if you're, so there's a variety of laws that govern speech in Canada right now as it is when it comes to libel and slander and intimidations and threats and promoting terrorism. So, and there's even basic, we'll have permission, we'll have allowances for, basic obscenity laws that are clear and laid out. I mean, there's no reason why, you should have to open your Facebook and see a billion F-bombs on your page. But when it comes to kicking people off for political reasons, I'm going to come up with laws that basically penalize companies for doing that. And if you do get banned, you'll have legal recourse to go after the company and get a penalty paid to you for that. So that's the type of laws we're working with. That's the ideas that I have. Obviously, we'll work that out. But the idea is that nobody should be banned for their opinion, and nobody should be banned for their political views.
So what about, since we're talking about, you mentioned terrorists, and we know that Trump recently said Antifa is now a terrorist organization. I believe you did a post about this as well. And is this a Canadian issue? Should Canadians be concerned about Antifa? And if so, why?
Well, I believe there's certainly more violence in the States on the streets. But we have some good examples here in Canada as well. One example that I used in another interview that I was on was during the last election, an elderly woman in Hamilton wanted to attend a speech by Maxime Bernier, the leader of the People's Party of Canada. And there was masked thugs outside that identified with Antifa that, threatened her and said, you're Nazi scum from wanting to go to this. I'm a conservative. I'm not a People's Party of Canada member, but I certainly don't believe that Maxime Bernier is a racist. And, there's many things you might want to say about him, but I certainly don't think racist would be fair. And even less so would an old lady trying to, hear her options politically be Nazi scum. So, that's, this type of intimidation, this sort of masked presence, which, if you look at what they teach, I mean, they teach, like just anarchist sort of street fighting tactics. It's not appropriate. I mean, if people are welcome to protest, but this type of violence is just not acceptable.
Mm-hmm. And then another hot topic when I said I was going to be speaking with you is 5G. So how do you think, if anything, that is a risk to Canadians, and how should that be handled by the government?
Well, one of the issues we have right now is that we haven't decided yet whether Huawei should be able to build the 5G network. So I am 100% against Huawei's involvement in 5G. The Huawei is, the architect basically behind China's surveillance system back home. So, I don't think we can trust Huawei to be building that type of a network here. And there's other rumors out there that Huawei or other Chinese agents and visitors from China may have stolen 5G technology from Nortel networks back in the days. So I don't think Huawei should have any place in building a 5G network. And if we are to build it, it should be, a Canadian company or from a country that we are allies with.
With what's going on with the economy, we definitely need some life back into Canadian business and using the resources we have. So the other question was, of course, what about Alberta? What about the oil? And then you can kind of maybe expand your overall, like my daughter's question as a teen, and she is a member, so you better get it right. She wanted to know, what you're going to do for our economy to make sure that she's able to have a fair shot at life as well.
Well, when it comes to getting our economy back on track, when it comes to paying off our debt, we have to take a look at the benefits and the resources that God has given this country. And we are phenomenally well endowed with natural resources and energy. And, we extract our oil in a way which is much better than, some of these other countries like, Saudi Arabia, for example. And we shouldn't be afraid or embarrassed about that fact. And we should be using it for the benefit of Canadians. And, right now, we don't even have the ability to refine Alberta. We don't have the ability to refine and process all of our oil here in Canada. So we have refineries on the East Coast. They bring in tankers of oil from Saudi Arabia and other places to process. And Alberta has to sell their oil largely down into the States at a discount. And then we buy it back from the States as well in a refined form. So there's no reason why we shouldn't have coast to coast, infrastructure, pipelines, and other things to make sure that we can process our own oil. It only makes sense. This will bring in billions more dollars to our to our economy through jobs and through tax revenues. We also need to make sure that Canada is open for business. And there's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of high taxes that discourage investment and growth. So we actually need to cut individual tax rates. We need to cut small business tax rates to encourage that entrepreneurship and growth. Growth is the only thing that will put our economy at a place where we can start paying for these things. And adding on more taxes or adding on more, or tacitly sort of attacking the energy industry, it's not going to help Canada. And there's always, new technologies are great, but we need to deal with what we have. And the energy industry is a major supporter of jobs, whether it be manufacturing jobs in Ontario, banking and legal jobs in our major cities, and on the ground jobs in our western provinces and eastern provinces as well. So it's of major importance to the country, and I'm 100% behind our western provinces and our energy industry.
Awesome. 2 more quick questions. What about the housing and the rental market? We've seen that skyrocket over the years in a lot of provinces, like where I live in Vancouver. So, even there's foreign owners that don't live here. So what would you do to make buying a home easier for middle-class families?
Yeah, so I am actually the only candidate here that has a good housing plan. And it's one of the issues that I felt Conservatives should address, because we typically focus on the economy and other things, but if we're not focusing on the very substance of what allows families to live and breathe and work in Canada, then we're not doing our job. And so the housing is based on basically 2 things. It's based on the fact that Canada has very high immigration levels per capita for a Western country, and we also don't do enough to discourage foreign investment in residential real estate. And we all know of the story of, the bedroom communities where no one's ever home, and it's just a way for a millionaire from another country to just park their money, and they don't care if they pay 5% more for the home. They're glad that they can park their money there. So for me, I'm actually reducing our immigration rates from 350,000 a year to 150,000 a year, which brings us in line with other sort of developed nations. And what that means is that if you take a look at the numbers of people that are settling in our major cities every year, it's far more than additional housing units that come online. So it's a simple matter of basically supply and demand. And we also have the issues of people from other countries that don't live here. They're not permanent residents. They're not citizens, buying 10 or 15 condos at a time just for an investment. So I am going to put in place a moratorium, or basically a ban for a year on all foreign residential real estate purchases to, let's analyze results. Let's see what happens. But we've seen a tremendous increase in our property values in our major city areas and surrounding. And it's important that we put Canada first, and we need to analyze and know the numbers of non-Canadians, people who are neither citizens nor permanent residents, that are purchasing these properties. And we need to make sure that we're putting Canadians first in this matter.
So the last question is a fluffy one. I figure Trudeau gets a lot of those. He makes sure he gets the easy question. So this is just to get to know you a little bit better. If you were stranded on an island, what are two non-survival related items that you would bring?
Wow, that's a great question. So, am I allowed to bring my phone, or is that cheating?
Service is gonna work. No phone. Let's say no phone.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, you know what? I would bring. So this is a tropical island surrounded by water, right? Yeah. You know what? I would bring my swim trunks and my kayak, and I guess that's two items. So I like water. I like the ocean, and I'd like to be able to use it if I was there.
Great. I like it. I like it. That's good. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. And if you guys are watching this and you liked what Derek had to say, I have linked in the description below the video here a direct link to Derek's website. And you can help by donating there if you feel like he's the man for the job. I think it's been quite challenging, right, for you guys to kind of, navigate around the pandemic and not be able to go door to door. So that is, if you're worried about where Canada goes and you think Derek's the man for the job, put your money where your mouth is and give a donation that you can afford. And also share this video. That is a very easy way to help Derek's campaign. Just share it with whoever you think, especially if you know any conservative members, you can share it with them. And let them know who Derek Sloan is. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. If you hit the bell, you can select all to have more videos like this. I don't know if I'll be interviewing more politicians, but stranger things have happened. Look at COVID-19. So yeah, thank you so much for being on here.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was fun. All right.